the topic is music and spiritism in America, is we are here living in this country. So we're going to have a reflection about the founding fathers and mothers of this country, what it means to be reincarnated currently in this country, what is our greater purpose here as we come across spiritism, and how can we be an extension of these teachings to benefit other people as we work together to improve ourselves in the process. And then in the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about this project, Caravan of Love, which is a project that is based on volunteers. The model is based from Brazil. Many Spiritist centers have that. They go to hospitals, they go to nursing homes, they go to orphanages in many places, and they just bring music. And it's a way to show what we do in New York, not just to show, but to encourage the community here to also contact your local nursing home, your local hospital, your local geriatric care facility, and volunteer to be there, to offer some recreation, offer some time for the patients, and use the devices of dance, of music. If you already do, that's wonderful. That's just another encouragement to really experience this charity in action, which is so rewarding for us. And in between, I'm going to play some songs and invite you all to actively listen to them, meaning really take it in and let's generate an atmosphere with our thoughts and our feelings, using the vehicle of music as a place to create lots of healing, lots of good energies. And we can have this as a dialogue. So at any moment, if you have any questions, if you want to make a comment, please feel free, speak, so that we can really participate as a group, and not just have one person talking and everybody listening. Sounds good? All right. Okay, so I'm going to start the opening slide by putting some of my favorite faces there, and I want to know if you can recognize these faces. Name some faces that we see here. Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Abigail Adams. So some of these men and women are pivotal for the founding of this country, not only as a country, but as promoters of a whole movement of freedom and democracy that our planet was getting geared up at the time to usher in. And they were very important instruments to make that together when they came here to this country. And we talk about freedom a lot in Spiritism because we understand that the more free will we have, the more responsibility. As Christ says, much will be asked of those to whom much was given. And it is safe to say that all of us enjoy in this country a lot of privileges, wouldn't you say? Now, we're not going to go into the political part. That's not the point of the lecture today. The point is to meditate on the essential history, the very beginning of the ideal, noble aspirations that animated these men and women, that fired up their enthusiasm in order to create a vision that would later transform the whole world. And we see that this was part of the plans of the higher spirits, of the messengers of Christ. When we read the book On the Way to the Light by Emmanuel, we see that at the right time, there is a huge migration of spirits that begins to take place from Europe into the new world, the new continent. And that Christ would set his hopes, and this is the key word here, his hopes in the North American continent, where it's going to be the seat of the material powers, and it would be the brain of the new civilization. Whereas in the lands of South America, more specifically around the region of Brazil, he would put the first fruits of the spirituality of tomorrow, and it would be the heart of the world. So there you have brain and heart interacting, and each designated with specific mission and specific tasks to bring the spiritualization of everyone in the world of regeneration which we are approaching. So as a place that's going to be in charge of the material powers, it is safe to say that we enjoy material prosperity here. It is a very abundant country from a material point of view. Science has advanced incredibly here. And we see that these men came with the mission to bring the freedom of the individual, no longer be submitted by monarchies, by kings and queens, by servitude. It really was the liberation of the individual so that we can take responsibility for our own actions without being imposed. But we know that the history of this country was very tough. There are a lot of battles, there are a lot of fights. So they had to fight for their independence from England. And then 100 years later, under Abraham Lincoln, during the spiritual revelation, when the new revelation that Spiritism would be known in France and in the United States would be modern spiritualism, the Consoler was manifesting himself through spirits all over the planet around the time that Abraham Lincoln was the president. And it's no coincidence that his wife was an avid spiritualist and conducted many seances in the White House. And many prominent mediums, very, very noble, very correct mediums that were very serious in their practice, would visit the White House in a very crucial time in the American history where this country was about to be divided in half over the issue of slavery, over the issue of the emancipation of everyone for equal rights. So whereas these gentlemen come earlier and sign a document saying, we recognize some unalienable truths that we're all created equal, and then that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which was a revolutionary document which would inspire other countries to follow suit. About 100 years later, this man would have to put it into practice because slavery was still a part of this country's history. So we needed to put it to the test through his administration. And we know through a book by Mary, the name doesn't remember. I will remember this name and I'll tell you later. She was a young medium that went to the White House, and many times she would go into trance and give Abraham Lincoln some very poignant advice about military strategy, which helped him heal the wounds of this country faster, helped to end the conflict of the Civil War faster. And it's funny that not a lot of people talk about this today, but it was thanks to his wife's initiative in bringing spiritualism inside the White House that Abraham Lincoln himself was very receptive to the Council of the Spirits. And we see how important this was to steer this country at a very crucial time. So we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to them, including this gentleman, Benjamin Franklin, who passes away in 1790 and would be one of the signers of the Spiritist codification, along with St. Augustine, with Swedenborg, with so many spirits that sign the books of Spiritism. Benjamin Franklin's name is there. And we can feel that he's actively involved, as Givaldo says, in the spirit realm today for the orchestration of the spiritualization of North America, among many spirits. Not all of them were perfect. They were men of their time. They had their flaws. But the inspiration that moved them, the idealism that moved them, is something that we, in 2017, can remember, reconnect with that vision in order to be enthusiastic about modeling this in our country today and take charge. The gospel, as Emmanuel says in the book Paul and Stephen, is a gospel of liberation. He talks a lot of the time, the freedom of the gospel. Let's implement the freedom of the gospel. The good news, when finally understood, when finally internalized, is liberating. The chains are the chains that are self-imposed, right? We impose those chains on ourselves based on our moral deficiencies, our behaviors that we still haven't mastered, the things that still keep us down. Yesterday we talked about the temptations. Let us not fall into temptation. In the prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, towards the end, what does he say? Let us not fall into temptation. Well, he doesn't say, let us not face any temptation. No, we need to face. We need to stare it right in the face, but then exercise our moral strength to overcome it and transform it, not fall, not succumb to it. And the more we practice that, the more we understand that we get closer to this idea of individual responsibility. As Paul says, everything is permitted for you. Everything is permitted for you. Not everything is beneficial for you. And how do we learn? Only through the experience. So what I love about the understanding that we reach in Spiritism is this infinite notion of freedom that comes with 100% individual responsibility, right? What do you guys think so far? Are we on the same page? Do we feel good about it? Okay. So when we trace the history of the world, we can go back to Moses, and we can see that the foundation of the house was laid with the Ten Commandments, with that revelation of the one God to centralize one Father, one Creator. And with the first revelation comes the don'ts in the Ten Commandments. At the time, according to our level of spiritual maturity, the Ten Commandments were all, don't do this, don't do that, don't. Because we were still very, very infant and very immature. Then comes the revelation of Christ to put love into the revelation of Moses, building on it, not changing it, not going against it, but merely adding another layer, becoming it more open to the majority of people, not just for the Hebrew people, but everyone is welcome. And Paul becomes the excellent emissary of this opening the doors of the temple so that everyone, Gentiles, Jews, to be able to accept, to understand the message, and to practice this inner Christ. And then we fast forward to the 19th century, when the planet was finally able and mature enough to assimilate this new revelation, the consoler, the promised consoler that would come to explain things to everyone without requirements of initiations, with rites, with rituals, with closed doors, with secret societies, with esoteric, mystical messages that needed to be hidden. No, we have finally achieved a state of adulthood and spiritual maturity where these spiritual revelations are accessible to everyone, regardless of the language, of the culture, regardless of the background. Anybody and everybody has access to it. Hello, welcome. How are you? Whoops, that was close. Thank you, Vince. You put it here. Appreciate it. All right. Hello. And so, where was I? Where was I? Let's see if you guys were paying attention. Where was I? The Revelations. So now that the revelations are fully clear, appealing to our rational common sense and logic, without any of those mysticisms or esoteric needs, then it's accessible to everyone. So we're all common. We can all access. And that's, as we talk about these topics, I'm going to show a few musical examples to illustrate them. And we see the importance of the history of the 20th century in the United States to continue its mission of educating the masses and providing the spiritual liberation to other people. And the 20th century was a very important century in our history. And it was prophesied by Nostradamus. And we saw this book, this was written in the book, The Sacred Contract of America, by a man named Manly Hall, who was a famous Freemason. And he said that Nostradamus predicted, now this was in the 1500s, that he said that a civilization would be born in the New World, in North America, that would provide the foundations of freedom and democracy, and they would celebrate those achievements by designating a day of Thanksgiving, which would be honored on a Thursday. Now this is 1500, and he was already being able to give that prediction that this land would celebrate the achievements of freedom and individual democracy and individual responsibility by marking Thursday to celebrate a day of Thanksgiving. Incredible, right? And what I love about this piece Are you familiar with this piece, Fanfare for the Common Man? For me, this piece brings that notion of individual freedom, individual responsibility in a melody. Fanfares are usually songs to honor the nobles, the monarchy, the kings, the aristocracy, pompous ceremony to honor those people. And he wrote one called For the Common Man, for you, for anybody. I love the word common because the word common has a derivative of community. And to feel that we belong to a community makes us feel that we are in communion, inner communion with our Creator, communion with our inner Christ, in communion with each other. It feels like we are connected and that we are giving energy to each other and receiving energy from one another. So when we see this piece, it was inspired by a speech that the Henry Wallace, or the vice president of FDR, made at the time that America needed to go to war with Europe in order to protect the expansion of the Nazis. And this country was tired of war. It had the Civil War, had the American Revolution, had the First World War. They didn't want to go to war. So they created a campaign in order to persuade the people and the public opinion to go to war for the sake of helping to liberate Europe from that threat. And in it, he made this very famous declaration that the new century, this century, is the century of the common man. And I think it goes so well with the Spiritist revelation and this new revelation of the Consoler, providing to each and every person that sense of individual responsibility. I no longer need to entrust my connection with God to the local authority figure of the church, the temple, whatever denomination. In no judgment or condemnation of organized religion whatsoever, not making a judgment here, but we have achieved the independence and the maturity enough that we can connect to God directly without having to rely on a third party. And Kardec talks about this, that the revelation of the spirits in Spiritism comes from multiple sources. The universality of the revelation is what gives its true testament about the validity and its source, because many of the mediums that brought these revelations, they had never known one another. There was no WhatsApp or Facebook or internet at the time. They were all corresponding through letters. So I want to show a performance of this, which is done in Royal Albert Hall in London by an American conductor. Her name is Maren Alsop, and she was the director of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra for many, many years. And she is leading a Brazilian orchestra on this performance. And today she is the conductor of the Sao Paulo Symphony Orchestra. So it's a great performance taking place in London with an American conductor and a Brazilian orchestra. This piece by Aaron Copland, Fanfare for the Common Man. As we hear the music, I invite you to meditate on the concepts we just talked about here, about individual freedom, responsibility, and the joy of having the ability to walk with our own 2 feet without having to rely on a master or a boss or a king or an employer in the way that we used to have to rely so many centuries ago. Okay? Is it possible to get the lights? Thank you. Whoops.
Very powerful.
Right? I was going to ask, what do you guys think?
I dance.
You dance.
I cannot meditate to that. Yeah, I can dance.
You can dance to that, right? Yeah, it's a very powerful piece. And whatever you guys prefer. For me, either way is fine. I think off is a little more comfortable, right? My computer just froze. So I'm going to give it a couple of minutes as it liberates itself from whatever it's doing. I think because we get so overwhelmed with stimuli from media and 24/7 news that have a general tone of fear, 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 we get a bit disenchanted and we get a bit hopeless if we're not watchful, if we don't sort of detach ourselves and put things into a greater context. That even though this is a movement that we see as a trend, I firmly believe that it's just a process to help people come to reflections on their own by observing something that doesn't really feel right inside, but they can't really articulate. But then by witnessing that, they're able to rise up and be active and take charge and say, okay, I need to stand for something. I need to be involved in my community. I can't just sit back and let things slide. So as Christ says, scandals are necessary to occur. They help our progress. They help our awareness to be able to distinguish right from wrong and build on it. But woe to those through whom the scandal appears. So the word scandal in Greek literally means something that makes you stumble. That's literally the word in Greek for scandal, is to stumble. So how can we avoid stumbling on it ourselves? So when we watch, because we want to be informed 24 hours, how can we watch this without stumbling in it ourselves? Meaning lose hope, get anxious, get panicky. Because a lot of people get into serious states of depression because they don't turn off the news. And we're not saying don't watch the news, but exercise moderation in it so that you are informed but not saturated by its content. Because it's almost like a collective spiritual hypnosis that takes place. And it's not one that's necessarily very liberating, very empowering for the individual. So understanding that, we take a step back and say, okay, it's a process. I'm going to pray and hope for the best, but I know this is just temporary, you know. And that's why bringing the memory of the founding fathers and mothers and understanding, it's nice blue shawl of Mother Mary, which we're going to play later. Remembering, rescuing the vision of the founding fathers and mothers in a talk like this, I think allows us to reconnect with some basic, essential, idealist visions that they had, so that we keep this flame alive, you know? And we have here Ludwig van Beethoven saying something. I was going to show the Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy that he talks about. And he mentions in his symphony something about the sacred fire, which we see in the Gospel according to Spiritism in this passage. When the spirit of Fenelon says, love is a magnet that the human heart cannot resist, and contact with love enlivens and fertilizes the seeds of the virtue that lies latent within it. As a dwelling place of trial and exile, the earth will then be purified by that sacred fire, and will see the practice of charity, humility, patience, devotion, self-denial, resignation, and sacrifice, all virtues that are the offspring of love. Love one another, and you will see earth very soon transformed and made into an Elysium, where the souls of the righteous go to enjoy repose. Very reassuring, very uplifting, and very soon will be transformed. So Elysium is a place in ancient Greek mythology where the heroes would arrive after going through their hero's journey. So it's the battle, the struggle, and the fights, and the hero arrive in the destination when the hero is successful. has his triumphant, victorious journey. So this is an idea for us to meditate ourselves, that as spirits that are incarnated in a physical body, in a planet of trials and atonements, going through a very big transformation, where the love magnet constitutes the sacred fire that through the fire is going to purify, is going to transform everything. We feel a sense of optimism. We feel a sense of responsibility to imprint our own sacred fire into this. What is the sacred fire that they're talking about? It's the power of our creativity, the power of our imagination, to be able to feel and think with such intensity, with such enthusiasm, with such joy, that we can move these energies from within us outward, and we can create a new environment. And I think music, art, dance is a powerful vehicle for those manifestations of the beautiful, of the ideal, of things that are a reality in higher spheres, and we see them here replicated in forms that are still a little bit rudimentary when compared with the spirit realm, but that nonetheless, when we come in touch with it, they really inspire us. So for us to never lose sight of this inner sacred fire that we have, which is the flame of enthusiasm, it's something for us to rescue every time that we're feeling a little down or a little disenchanted or a little depressed. And I think the feeling of community, coming together like a center, like an organization that's intentional in what they do for the community, gives us a feeling of tremendous happiness, of fulfillment. I mentioned this yesterday. There's a Netflix documentary called Happy. Have you seen this documentary? Isn't it phenomenal? It's an extraordinary documentary about what makes people happy, and they interview people from all over the world. You gotta watch. It's really beautiful. What's the name again? Happy. Just happy. One of the biggest drivers of happiness in people's lives is their feeling of belonging to a community, that they're part of a greater collective. That gives them purpose, that gives them a sense of fulfillment, meaning. So for us to be able to attune and connect with a community, help to grow it, help to nourish it all the time, is a powerful driver of happiness. So far, so good? And even the word enthusiasm we mentioned, I'm remembering some of the things we spoke about yesterday, and I'm bringing them again. Sacred fire, igniting that enthusiasm. When we look at the word enthusiasm, from the Greek, it's a combination of words. What does theo mean in Greek? God. I don't have the slightest idea. Theo is God. So the middle particle, the thusis part, is to fill with God. When we energize something, when we enthuse, when we empower, enthusiasm then is to fill something with God, fill someone with God. When we are enthusiastic ourselves, it's like we're filled with the Spirit of God. So to keep that notion when we are interacting with people can really be a great instrument. So we're going to go to singing, and I want to show another example of singing. The idea of singing as a human activity is as ancient as breaking bread around a table of eating. And it's something that goes really deep in our brains. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've heard of cases of people that are in advanced stage of Alzheimer's and dementia, where they don't even know their name anymore. But if you play them music, or if you remind them of a song that they really enjoyed, they will begin to sing that song, to the point where they will have a temporary remembrance. They'll become lucid for a few minutes, and then they'll shut down back to their normal state. And there's another documentary, this is a little list of good things as takeaways here, called Alive Inside. Have you seen this? Also on Netflix, available for anybody who has Netflix. Alive Inside, take a look. It's a documentary that talks about a foundation in the United States that has created a program called Music and Memory. They basically go to hospitals. They meet with the family members of the patients, and they ask the family to curate a playlist of songs that were very dear to the patient. Then they put it in an iPod, and they play for the patient, and they have nurses that are accompanying the development. You have to see the reactions of these patients. You cry with them. Because after a while of hearing, they start to dance, they start to sing, and as the music stops, they look and they recognize the daughter, they recognize the son, they recognize family. They come back alive. So the way they describe the theories of neuroscience goes that it's registered in such a deep part of our brain, and I think that's part of the reason why it's so ancient and it's so powerful. And I wish we, as a movement of spiritists, could rely on art and music more and sing the way we see churches of gospels, they sing. Because when we sing, we rejoice. And at first, we may feel a little out of place, a little, I don't like to sing in public, this is kind of awkward. But after we break that first ice and really connect with that sacred fire as he talks in the gospel, it really produces an inner healing. The spirit of Giacomo Rossini, the Italian composer. How long do we have? No, I'm looking at the clock and I'm just going here. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, I gotta keep. Okay, thank you. I gotta keep mindful of the time. The composer Rossini, he has a communication that he gives in posthumous works by Kardec, where he says that harmony, melody, these attributes of music that is very elevated, inspired music, they have the effect of dematerializing us, literally. So as we are spirits incarnated in a dense body and are helping to spiritualize the planet we're in and spiritualize ourselves in the process, when we attune to these kinds of music and this kind of beautiful, sublime experiences, it helps us to dematerialize ourselves because it goes directly to our emotions and helps us to soothe and heal our emotions. Do you feel that when you listen to very inspired music? Right? And these are just some passages from the gospel of what the disciples used to do. When they had sung a hymn, they went to the Mount of Olives. Paul to the Corinthians, what shall I do? I will pray with my spirit, but also with my mind. I will sing with my spirit, and I will sing with my mind. Sing with my heart, my emotions, and also sing with understanding. Sing with reason. Meaning, I'm not going to just sing. I'm going to realize that I'm consciously doing an exercise of self-healing and healing others when I'm singing. Speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord. And it's told by Haroldo, who studies the Aramaic texts, that a lot of what Jesus spoke in some of his most profound passages were spoken in rhythmic poetry, rhythmic rhyme, almost as if he was reciting songs. And in the Last Supper, they would sing hymns, spend the whole day singing hymns there. So this activity of singing is very powerful and very ancient and something that we can incorporate in our lives. Okay, I'm going to play a song that's very dear to this country, has a very beautiful history, and from a spiritual point of view, I have felt this, and we've spoken to many mediums, we see that it has a great resonance in the spirit realm, because it's a song about freedom, about liberation. I'm trying to see if anybody can guess which song it is, but there's a very beautiful history about it. The person that composed the lyrics of Amazing Grace was a slave trader himself. And the story goes that in the middle of a very heavy thunderstorm, when it was pretty clear that they were going to sink the boat, they were about to die because the thunderstorm was so violent, this man went into the front of the ship and he began to desperately pray to survive, pray to be rescued. And in that prayer, he had this inner mystical experience. He had a coming of his senses, the way the prodigal son comes to his senses, the way Paul of Tarsus comes to his senses at the gates of Damascus. And he writes these lyrics down. And from that moment on, he quits being a slave trader and actually joins the abolitionist movement and becomes one of the most active voices for the liberation of slavery. And the lyrics of the song are very much in tune with his own personal liberation from the slavery. So this is about slavery, but also let's remember it's about the slavery of our own moral imperfections that we're working to liberate ourselves from. And as we see the lyrics and we hear the music, I would like to invite you and encourage you to sing along. This room is perfectly suited for music because of the natural acoustics. So when we sing, let's connect with the guides, the benefactors of this house. Let's connect with the guides, the benefactors of this beautiful Chesapeake Bay, that's how you say it, North Beach area, who are attuned with anyone who's gathered around something of goodwill, of good intentions. Remember, as Christ says, if 2 or more gather in my name, I will be there. So to feel the Christ presence in our midst, we can sing in order to elevate this feeling together. So I invite you all to sing if you want. If you don't want, you want to close your eyes and enjoy the vibrations, feel free. Where is Sarah? Sarah, would you like to sing too for us? Sarah has a beautiful voice, guys. You can sing from there if you want. I don't want to embarrass you, but she has a phenomenal voice, so I don't want her to be shy. She came all the way from Baltimore, so I'm going to ask one of you to press play for me. Like here, when I'm ready. Right there. Because I can't do both. Ready, Sarah? I'll sing, right? Thank you. One more time. If we turn on the speaker, it actually helps a lot also. Here we go. Okay, now we're good. Ready? It's a little loud. Okay. Everybody now, really loud, really good. What a great room for concerts. Doesn't it feel great to sing as a group? Okay. It's about all feeling good here today. Not necessarily many intricate doctrinal ideas, but more about feeling good with the music. Who has read the books by Léon Denis? Léon Denis was a continuator, if you will, of Allan Kardec's literature. And he has a book called Spiritism in Art, which is phenomenal. And he talks about so many ways where the spirit realm uses art, uses music to further spiritualize humanity. And in this book, he says this very beautiful passage about music and what it does. It says, music, as we know, plays a great role in prophetic and religious inspiration. It places rhythm in the fluidic emission and facilitates the action of elevated spirits. It facilitates the action of elevated spirits. That's a very important declaration. Facilitates the action of elevated spirits. This is why it has its place in Spiritist meetings, in the sessions when it is good to open them with the... I don't know what happened here, but with an appropriate hymn for the circumstances. Oftentimes, the guides of the group exhort the assistants to sing a hymn in order to enable the manifestations. Now, this is at the time of Léon Denis, at the time of Kardec. We get a little glimpse of how perhaps some of those meetings at the Parisian Society were held, and whether or not they relied on music to help elevate the frequency so that the spirits could do the work. Sing a hymn in order to enable the manifestation. But up to now, we must confess, Spiritists find themselves lacking of this type of music and are forced to turn to vulgar songs that aren't worthy of the intended objective. It pains us to realize more than once the shortage of musical resources in use at our Spiritist groups. And I almost feel like this could have been written last year, even though there has been a lot of progress. And when we talk about Spiritist art and Spiritist music, it doesn't mean that you're taking music and art and putting it in the service of Spiritism necessarily, but it's inspired music from the Spiritist principles. Immortality of the soul, reincarnation, the ability to communicate between the invisible and the visible world. These are ideas and concepts that are present in Spiritism that inspire us. And when they inspire us, we can express them in art, express them in dance, express them in music. And that's what he's talking about here. There have been many organizations all over Brazil that have done a lot of beautiful compositions that are inspired by this. But I, as a musician, can name thousands of songs and pieces of composers like Beethoven, like Tchaikovsky, like Mahler, like so many, that is saturated with this higher spirituality and this inspiration in their melodies. So there's a book by Stafford Beatty, and this man has already been interviewed by Kardec Radio a few times. The work that he does is extraordinary. This book is called Heaven and Hell Unveiled, and he basically takes mediums and spiritualist groups all over the country, and he did a cataloging, a research of what they say regarding heaven, about hell, about reincarnation, about mediumship, in order to compare. It's almost like a compendium. And I learned a lot about mediums in this country in the beginning of the 20th century that have done phenomenal work as a result of his research. He also quotes the books by André Luiz here, and he does mention Spiritism. But there's a passage here in this book that was very moving, and it was channeled by an American medium, and basically he was taken as a spirit to the spirit realm to witness a healing ceremony for the benefit of recently deceased souls that had just recently departed the earth and had arrived in the spirit realm. And he says that it was a massive stadium, like an arena. And as they were walking and sitting themselves in the bleachers, he could see that everyone had a smile on their face. They were very happy to be there. And it was people from all over the world. It says here, every nation belief was represented. Jews, Muslims, Christians, atheists, all of them there gathered in this extraordinary event, which was going to be a healing event. And in the arena itself, they were bringing in cots, like the paramedic cots, and lining all of these spirits, hundreds of them. And they were half asleep, they were semi-conscious, many of them weren't moving. Some of their bodies, spiritual bodies, was a bit distorted, deformed. And when a being of a lot of light comes to the center and begins to get the whole auditorium, the whole stadium to sing, he said that each spirit that was lying in the cot would slowly begin to move, begin to wake up, and then they had groups that would go one by one, and with the help of the music, they would reconstruct the very spiritual deformities, and those spirits would wake up feeling fully rested. Now, all of it centered around this powerful music vibration. So I wanted to bring this as an idea of music as medicine, because when we read this passage in the book, we get transported just by the way it's describing. We can't imagine how much healing we can do ourselves when we just put on some music in the background, or when we sing ourselves. How much healing can we do when we sing ourselves? And I wanted to show this video, which is very powerful. Remember the ancient idea of music as singing as an activity? This is a video that's on YouTube that for me is very powerful. Is the Georgian church in the country of Georgia that receives Pope Francis. This happened a year or two ago. And they wanted to sing a psalm in their own language to welcome the Pope. And the way they sing, the inspiration, it really reconnects us to something deep, deep inside of us. So I wanted to offer this as another example of very uplifting music, almost healing. And this is only 4 or 5 minutes long. And again, if you want to get into the vibration of the music and close your eyes and stay in prayer and meditation, because there is no lyrics here. This is in Georgian. I don't know if anybody here speaks. But actually, no, I apologize. This is in, I believe it's in Aramaic. Okay, so here we go. Nope.
USB audio. Box audio.
How did that feel? If we've been reincarnating in this planet for many, many, many lives, chances are at some point we might have come across this type of singing. So I personally feel it evokes such powerful memories. And it's not very hard music, it's very simple harmonies, but it's done in such a profound level of devotion and respect and love that that's what carries its intensity across. We had this in a room that has a natural echo, and you could almost feel the reverb doing something inside of us. And remember, all the Psalms of David were songs. They were compositions meant to be played in the harp, sung, and poetry that he wrote. We often look at the Bible and the New Testament and the Old Testament as just texts, but they made them come alive with music. So something for us to keep in mind. And we're getting close to our end. I'm sorry, I have to learn how to do PowerPoint in a way to get to the original slide. We're going to go there. Any impressions on the song? Any specific feelings that we want to share from what we just heard? Very pure. Okay.
The energy was so good.
Energy. Any powerful energy, right?
Yes.
This is another passage from the book by Leon Denis called Spiritism in Art. And here the spirit describes the musical events that happen in the spheres, in the universe, in the spirit realm. He says, during the great parties and celebrations in space, our spirit guide tells us, when souls gather by the millions to pay tribute to the Creator in the irradiation of their faith and love, from their beings, emanations escape, luminous rays that take on color combinations, which are transformed in melodic vibrations. Color combinations that are transformed in melodic vibrations. Colors merge into sounds, and from this communion, remember the word communion, community, common, from this communion of fluids, of the thoughts and feelings, exude a sublime symphony. This symphony is answered by distant chords of the spheres and countless stars that populate the immensity. So there's a dialogue. There's a musical dialogue that takes place, an interaction. And then, from on high, other chords, more powerful yet, descend, and an universal anthem make heaven and earth tremble. Realizing these chords, the spirit develops, expands. He feels he lives in divine communion and enters a rapture that reaches ecstasy. I wonder how that sounds like, how it feels. There are many people that have gone through near-death experiences that are from all backgrounds, religious backgrounds. And many of them report that in their state of the outside the body, they could hear melodies that were so sublime they couldn't even describe them if they could. And that many of them wouldn't hear them through their physical ears, but it was their whole being was listening to it. Their whole being was hearing it. Just like we know that in the spirit realm, without the impediment of a physical body, we see in panoramic 360. So for us to wrap our brains around those abilities. So this passage just gives me such inspiration to want to experience this. And I believe we can. We don't have to wait to leave our physical body. Every night when we go to sleep, we can prepare ourselves for a great journey, and we can ask to be taken to these places. And trust me, we will remember it. Even if we don't recall vivid memories of the experience, but if we wake up with a feeling, man, I woke up so refreshed. That alone is going to be beneficial for us to carry our day in a much better way. So we're going to end with a very famous song. And this image here, we talked about it yesterday in the Spiritist Society of Baltimore. That as we do the work of spiritualizing ourselves and inner transformation, intellectual and moral improvement, and we're aided by the books of Spiritism to help us guide us in this process, we help to create this scene inside of our hearts. The Christ of the planet, when is reincarnated as the person of Jesus in order to exemplify the teachings, he chooses a manger, simple, humble manger to be born. And in that, there's a very powerful teaching. The Christ child being born in the center. What do we see in the surroundings? Animals. How are these animals at this moment? Very friendly, very appeased, very domesticated, if you will. And this can serve as a memory for us. I got this inspiration from a lecture by Haroldo Dutra Dias when he describes this scene in a way for us to domesticate our own inner beasts, our own inner animals of pride, of revenge, our animals of lust and vanity and selfishness. These conditioned reflexes that Kardec talks about, that we've cultivated for so many reincarnations, that when we can learn to master them, to domesticate and appease them, it doesn't mean they're going to go away, but they're going to be appeased so that the Christ in the middle can really be born in our hearts and can really dominate and transform the animals around. That's the movement we work within ourselves, within our hearts. And we can use the power of music, the power of the art, in order to give us that extra enthusiasm, that sacred fire, to help purify this part. We can talk more about this, but if you want to see the lecture yesterday, I think it's on YouTube or Facebook, we talked about the Sermon of the Mount, in a Reflections of the Sermon of the Mount according to Spiritism, and we talk more in depth about this. But I actually wanted to focus not on the Christ child being born in our hearts as we appease and domesticate the inner beast, but actually on the mother, the maternal love, the highest form of love expression we can think of on planet Earth. And remember our own mothers in this musical exercise. I'm going to play the Ave Maria by Franz Schubert. And as I play the Ave Maria, I want to invite all of us to remember our own biological mothers and all those mother figures in our lives who had a very important role to play. And let's vibrate gratitude. Let's vibrate a feeling of love and devotion for all of their sacrifices, of all the mothers in our lives. Even though today is Father's Day in Brazil, we're going to use today's Father's Day to pay a tribute to the mothers. And just a quick aside on Franz Schubert, when he wrote the Ave Maria, it was one of over 600 songs that Schubert composed in his very short life. He died in his early 30s. And he was so poor that many of the pieces that he composed, he actually wrote in napkins of the tavern because he couldn't afford to buy manuscript paper. And he would go in many nights of playing music for his friends in the famous Schubertiats, the gatherings around the tavern where Schubert would play music, because that way he could eat. They could give him food in exchange for playing. And the story goes that sometimes these songs he would compose, he would trade them for a plate of food. So it's very possible that this piece, Ave Maria, could have been written in a moment of profound desperation by this spirit who was just looking for a plate of food. So in that simplicity, there's even greater purity, I think, and greater inspiration. So I invite you all to sit back, if you want to close your eyes, and use the melody of the mothers to remember the mother in your life and pay tribute of gratitude to them. Yeah? And maybe we can turn the light in the back off too, just to create a more conducive environment. So make sure the sound's working. Yes, it is. Okay. So just before we close, I wanted to mention what I had told earlier about this project we've been doing for about 10 years in New York, the Caravan of Love. And we go twice a month to the nursing home in Brooklyn and to the Veterans Hospital in Manhattan, where we see in the Veterans Hospital two departments, the department of the veterans that are going through mental health issues, and the department on the other side that is dealing with veterans with substance abuse. And it's a very beautiful experience that does not require professional musicians in order to make it happen. We're all a group of volunteers. Many of us are not even part of the Spiritist Center, and sometimes we have 6, 7 volunteers, sometimes we have 3, sometimes we have 15 people. It really depends on people's availabilities. And we'll just spend an hour or two. We have songbooks that we distribute to the patients, and we encourage them to sing along. There is absolutely no preaching, there is no talking about religion, but there is a talk about spiritualization through music, which is in a very ecumenical way. And the type of response we get from the patients is so uplifting. We think we're going there to give something to them. We come out having received so much. We're the ones that come out incredibly uplifted. And we have a party that happens at the end of the year where we have clowns and choreography. There's a lot of dancing too. Abigail was a lot of fun. So the reason I'm mentioning this project is to encourage the Spiritist community centers that we talk in to reach out to the local nursing home or the hospital, because when we have kids in a Spiritist center, like youth, young adults, or younger children, one way to integrate them into the community is through art, is to encourage them to go to a hospital visit like this and to play, maybe have one number that is just the kids that are singing. In the nursing home, the patients love to see young kids. And when they go, their faces light up because you see little kids. So that's just an exercise that a Spiritist center can implement in their community, which is charity in action. It energizes the community. It even adds a mediumistic complement to the center. We feel very strongly the presence of some of the benefactors and the guides when we go do this work, because every time we're touching a patient, when we greet them, when we hug them, we feel that we're giving them a pass. We feel that we're really transmitting a lot of very healing energy. And it's just a space that's safer for somebody who has never heard about Spiritism and doesn't maybe feel very comfortable about going into a center for the first time. We'll say, listen, let's go to a charitable visit, a community visit, and people are like, okay, I want to volunteer my time. And after a while, they begin to feel like they're being instruments themselves, and who knows, maybe they'll get curious about some of the books. But the point is, we're not going to go there to preach or to convert anyone, but just to energize the community around one work that we do. And every center has their own, but I want to bring this one as a way for you to do it here if you haven't done it or if you wish to do. All the songs, I can send it to you by email, the songs that we've compiled, the songbook. And when we don't have live musicians playing, all these songs are available online as MP3 karaoke versions that we can download, take a radio like this, and just sing along and make it into a fun party, fun experience for everybody. So thank you for your time, for your presence. Thank you for listening to the music, and I hope we can all leave here today more inspired to use music as a resource in our lives. Yep. Thank you. Thank you.